Hello everybody, welcome to Put What, Where, Why, and How. I am your creative organizer, Mike Raish, and today's topic is about finishing what you started. Because getting started is only half the battle, which we talked about last week, and what goes into starting projects. So I'm going to do a little more detail about what goes into finishing projects, because so many people are so into starting things, having cool ideas, putting it to the test, and then ultimately letting it go. And the first thing I want to say is that's totally okay. You can't stop yourself from getting started on something if you fear not finishing it, because then you'll never get started on anything. And there's so many other reasons why we might not finish a project. And a lot of people have commented on the forums this week about said things. Things like insecurities, the fear of failing at whatever it is that you're doing or whatever you do isn't good enough. Also the fear of success, as if when you cross the finish line, you're somehow signing up for more stuff because you become obligated to meet the expectations that you now set for yourself. So there's also running out of resources like time or motivation or materials or manpower or money, whatever the case may be. There's so many reasons to not finish something. More reasons to not finish than probably to finish. There's usually only one reason to finish, and that's whatever the purpose of the project is. So it really all comes down to resources, and the most valuable resource that you have when it comes to starting and finishing projects is your attention and focus. So it's really interesting to think about your attention as a resource, and it's so closely related to the resource of time, because if you use your attention properly and focus at the right points, then it'll feel like you have more time, or at least you're taking advantage of the time you've been given. Now I wanted to say that distractions are something that often stop us from keeping on task, focusing, that attention that I was just talking about. So many things, and there's in the world that we have today with little phones in our pockets and everything is inside them, and we're always on social media, and we're always being bombarded by billboards and radio ads and television commercials and all the things. It's so easy to get distracted. Text message, boom, you've lost focus. So it's so easy to get distracted, and there's a good reason for that, because distractions are actually really helpful on a survival level. Like if you hear something coming that's going to eat you, then you would want to be distracted and prioritize the threat that's happening. So distractions are not always bad. A baby crying is probably another really good example of when a distraction is probably helpful to the human race or to yourself or whatever. So distractions can be helpful, but more than often not, they are not helpful. And removing those distractions is going to really help you. And removing distractions is about turning off notifications, making sure you're closing yourself off from things entering your space, and just making sure that you know what your priority is. What are you working on? And just, you have to pick the most important thing and focus on it, or else you're never going to get anything done. You'll just get little sprinkles of things done amongst many things. And that seems to be a lot of people's problem, is that there's just too many things to keep track of. And you could probably cut that down, but even if you do cut it down, as human beings, we're pretty complex, so you still have a lot to keep track of. Now I want to talk about the myth of multitasking. Multitasking is this idea that, and it's even on job resumes or applications and whatever, that they're looking for people that know how to multitask, when really there is no multitasking with us. We only have the attention that we can give, and if you're multitasking, you're actually wasting time changing your perspective or your state of being to do something totally different, and then you have to rear back and get back into whatever you were doing, and all of the transitional time is really where time is wasted. So if you can just pick what's most important and stick to it, we'll actually get more done. Now, what I think businesses are probably looking for in a skill rather than multitasking is the ability to prioritize and tackle tasks. So they may be responsible for multiple tasks, but you don't want to be multitasking at one period of time, because ultimately you're losing time by not doing one particular thing for a focused period of time. Now, there's two kinds of tasks that constitute a task. There's the convergent tasks and the divergent tasks. And I consider the convergent tasks are ones that have a clear end goal. So you have your dinner plate, you have so much food on it, you eat until the food is gone. When the food is gone, you know you're finished. So that's a pretty obvious finish line. Also with like marathons, there's literally a finish line that you can cross. So like these are things that are very defined and you can cross. But there's divergent tasks, which are more common in like the arts and stuff. So say for instance, I'm gonna write a song or I'm gonna paint a portrait. When you're doing this thing, the perfectionism inside of a lot of us doesn't know when it's finished. You're just constantly adding to whatever the work of art is, and you haven't defined what finished looks like, so therefore it's hard to do so. And these tasks can be really fun because usually these kinds of tasks you would do them because of an inherent joy of doing the task itself, which the end goal is not always the purpose of doing the task. Completing the task is certainly probably why there is an end to the task, but like the journey to the end of the task is more important in most cases. Because once you end the task, then it's over, and then you're moving on to the next thing, and then you're doing more journeying to the next end goal, whatever that is. So means to an end is not a thing you want to be chasing, I suppose. And when it comes to purpose of a task, it's, again, I'm going to keep repeating this as much as I can, connecting to the why that you're doing it. Like, is it because you need whatever's at the end of the line, or are you crocheting because you just simply love to do so? So connecting to the why, what brings you joy, what makes you happy, what brings you fulfillment, what can you do with the time you've been given, and give yourself meaning. And it's really interesting because there's the applied research in quality of life. They came out with a study that talked about the before, during, and after of planning a vacation. Or not planning a vacation, having a vacation. So the before is the planning, during is having the vacation, and then there's this post-vacation area. And they measured people's happiness throughout each stage of the vacationing, and they found that pretty much more people were happier about the planning stage because they were looking forward to the vacation. They actually had more happiness planning it than actually going and the after period. It also came out and said that people that had a relaxing vacation, one that didn't have a lot of things to do, had a kind of a period of happiness after. So if you plan like a really rigorous vacation, you'll probably mostly be happy before the planning, but you won't come out the other end feeling relaxed. So consider that in terms of what your goals are for your vacation. Another thing about the before, during, and after is, I'm going to bring up the marathon analogy again. People that run marathons, they have this thing called post-marathon blues, where people will work very, very hard to do a marathon, and then the marathon finally happens, and they cross the finish line, and it feels amazing because they worked so hard and so long to get to this point that after it's over, they have this, like, downtime. And you get really, really sad because that hanging goal you had the whole time you're working so hard towards is suddenly gone. So it's almost like a withdrawal of having a goal set, which is really interesting. So again, like finishing a task, depending on the scale of the goal, you could actually fear finishing it because the aftermath might not be very pleasant. But then what you want to do there is just make sure that you have something else to look forward to. So really having stuff planned to look forward to is going to impact your ability to finish things and also impact your joy of doing so. One last thing I want to talk about is boredom. We don't get bored very much these days because there's just so much input all the time with, again, all the technology and advertising and blah, blah, blah. So researchers have shown that boredom actually engages parts of the brain that wouldn't otherwise be ignited. And what happens is there's like, on a subconscious level, there's connections being made, and you're kind of like processing and downloading a lot of information, and a lot of creativity emerges from boredom. And we have so many boredom killers in our life now, like, again, the technology, where once you have a lick of boredom, you're like, oh, I'm gonna check my phone. And so you never have the mindset or the space to be in the boring state. And there's so much bad like reputation with boredom, like, ooh, don't do that, boredom is for boring people. But quite the contrary, boredom allows people to kind of discover and express new ways of being, because they're not constantly just receiving input and being engaged all the time. There has to be this period of calm and boring mindsets to let that all sit in. So finishing things really comes into focusing again, and when you have too much input, then you won't have the energy for output, and then you won't finish anything. So try to take handle on the distractions that you have around you and try to prioritize what's most important, connect to why it's important to you, and hopefully through self-discovery, the motivation will bubble up and you'll begin to feel confident in finishing things. I hope that this was helpful. Thanks for sticking around. And I will be here next week to talk about dealing with death and late relatives stuff. Should be an interesting chat by special request from a friend. So I'll be chatting about that next week. Thanks for joining. Love you, bye.